Jenny is going to be talking to us about international intelligibility, English pronunciation for a global world. And Jenny's an English teacher and an exam trainer. She's got 20 years experience, and she's a regular presenter on OUP's ELT channels. And if you've had a chance to see her before, you'll know she's really passionate about pronunciation, teaching, and learning. She's also the founder of Phona, which publishes the award-winning Say It English pronunciation app that you might have seen as well. This is a great app. This is an app that makes pronunciation really visual and interactive and easier to learn.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed the session. I'm just going to go ahead and put up your slides, Jenny.
Thank you, Stacey. Thank you for the introduction as well. That was great. Everything's working very seamlessly at this conference so far. It seems really good. I was just catching the end of the last presentation and all the questions. It's brilliant to see how much participation there is. And for us, as I think as presenters and also for the moderating team, to see how engaged people are is just fantastic, because that's why we do this, don't we? We want to be presenting, but getting that feedback as well and that interaction. So thank you. All
Absolutely.
the hellos, and I like the shout out to Sean as well. He is very professional. Great.
Right. So I'm going to let you get on with it. And again, you know, guys, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section at the top of the chat box over next to the chat. Over to you, Jenny.
Lovely. Thanks, Stacey. Brilliant. Well, hi, everybody. As Stacey said, my name's Jenny Dance. And today I'm going to be talking about international intelligibility and English pronunciation for a global world. So I do have more than 20 years experience now in teaching English. I've done a lot of business English teaching and a lot of exam training. And I've worked as an examiner as well, but what I really enjoy in teaching, the thread for me all the way through that's motivated me, is pronunciation training. And, you know, pronunciation, I would say teaching and learning, let's put it that way, because I really enjoyed the comment actually about the at the end of the last session where people were talking about professional development and how important learners can be as a source of that professional development, as well as colleagues. So teaching and learning pronunciation, that's really what sort of motivated me and driven me in my work as an English teacher. Okay, so I think here we go. Slides, good, because we need to be able to see the slides. All right. So let's have a look and see if I can tap this to move on. Not that button, hold on. Oh, there we go. Great. So we're on slide 1, which is good, or slide 2 technically. So we are, I think, all aware as English teachers just how much of a global language English is right now. It's a global communications tool. But I think the statistic is still really impressive, which is that more than 75% of English users in the world today are non-native speakers. They're non-native speakers, 3/4 of the people using English. And of course, this has an enormous impact and a lot of implications for English teaching, particularly in the area of pronunciation. And by pronunciation, what we're talking about really is making sure that communication is effective, both the speaking, the production, but also the receptive listening skill as well. And in this presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the ideas that were put forward in OUP's position paper, English Pronunciation for a Global World. You can see the front cover of the position paper there. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, definitely do take a look at this later, because what I'm doing is just presenting some of the ideas, but there's a much deeper kind of piece of writing, which would be great for professional development, among other things, for you guys to look at in this position paper. And more specifically in today's session, we're going to look at, that's just gone over my slide, actually. Hold on, how do I? I can't see my slide very clearly because I've got a little thing inviting me to download the position paper.
Press the cross you can see the top right corner. There's a cross.
Yeah, I can't actually see the cross because it's over at the top of my screen under the like the search bar. Can I just tap on the main screen to... the only option I can actually access at the moment is download now, but I'd quite like to give the talk.
Okay, I'll try and work it out for you. Hang on, keep going. And we'll keep going.
Let me keep talking and see if I can. The problem is I can't really see my slides. The side of them's cut off. I'm sorry, Sean. Okay, let me just carry on talking about what we're going to be discussing, which is how the widespread use of English, so English being used globally, and by these 75% of non-native speakers as well, how that impacts our approach to pronunciation, teaching and learning. Secondly, we're going to look at which elements of the English sound system we should focus on to help our learners with the pronunciation skills that they need for international intelligibility. And thirdly, we're going to talk about technology and the role that technology should play in effective pronunciation, teaching and learning. Okay, I also have a couple of takeaway activities at the end of the session, which I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. And for one of the activities, it's helpful if you're able to get hold of, this is a small piece of tissue paper. I don't know if you can see this, just some paper, piece of thin tissue paper. If you're able to grab a piece of tissue paper now, I'm going to show you what we're going to do with it at around halfway through the presentation, something like that. So see if you can grab a little piece of paper and join us with that activity a bit later. Okay, but before I get started on my next slide, which hopefully I'll be able to see all of very soon.
We're working on it, I promise.
Okay, thank you. I would love you to let me know in the comments. Somebody's suggesting, try maximizing the window to see the X. Maximizing, window is maximized. The last little pop-up, I was able to just check the X, but I think what's happened with this one is it's quite a high format, the image.
Yeah, I can see that as well. I can see the issue you're having.
Okay, all right, okay, fine. I'll carry on talking.
We've got big markers support on it. So
thanks, guys. Thank you. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, audience. Let me come back to you guys. So what I would like to know in the comments is, are you able to tell me the last time that you taught pronunciation? Was it yesterday? Was it last week? Was it last month? Maybe. And if you can tell me what kind of things you were teaching as well, maybe it was a particular, brilliant, thank you. Maybe it was a particular sound, or maybe it was a particular word. Right, I can see my slides again now. Yesterday, every day, today. Wow, people are really on it with this pronunciation teaching. That's great. 2 weeks ago, yeah. Well, there's a lot of people letting me know that they're teaching pronunciation. A lot of people teaching it fairly regularly. There are so many comments, they're going by really fast, but it's great to see how many people are teaching pronunciation really regularly. Okay, so let's take a closer look at what we mean by international intelligibility. What we're talking about here is English being used as a global communications tool, as I said before. And that means that the aim of pronunciation teaching has shifted maybe from where it was in the past. So we're not talking about necessarily acquiring a native speaker accent. We're talking about making sure that your learners are intelligible in this global use of English, this global English space. Okay. Here we go. Great. And pronunciation teaching certainly is not an optional extra. It's important, I think, to understand just how significant pronunciation is in terms of impacting communications and intelligibility. And I think this little illustration here really helps to illustrate this point. So this person is also talking about or making the point that they are able to listen and they don't have to concentrate to understand. They can understand almost everything, and yet the speaker's accent is different from mine. So we're talking about making sure that your students, your learners are able to use their understanding of English sounds and the aspects of pronunciation across a whole range of accents. And it's certainly not an optional extra, because in fact, research shows that up to 2/3 of miscommunication between speakers using English is down to pronunciation. Up to 2/3 of the problems that people have when they're using English to communicate is thought to be because of specifically pronunciation. So not grammar, not vocabulary, but pronunciation. So absolutely crucial to make sure that we're doing this with our learners. And then the third point here, I guess, in terms of international intelligibility, is that we certainly don't have to teach everything. We don't have to correct every pronunciation error or deviation. What we do want to do is focus on those sounds and aspects of the English sound system which are essential, relevant, and also achievable for our learners. That's really important, I think. Okay. So, oh, look, we're at a poll, which is great because it means I get to ask you another question. You answered in the chat box earlier, letting me know about when you last taught pronunciation. And now I want to ask a slightly different question. How confident do you feel when you're teaching pronunciation? So this is to be answered as a poll. And I believe, great, here we go. Here's the poll. So let me know, do you feel very confident teaching pronunciation, mostly confident, or not very confident? I'm going to put very confident for myself. I think I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about pronunciation, teaching and learning. And maybe you feel confident because you have a great book or a great tool, or you've had some great training. Maybe let us know, as well as responding to the poll, let us know in the chat box if there's a reason that you feel very confident, or perhaps there are reasons that you've identified that mean you feel less confident or not very confident. Maybe you feel you haven't had enough training specifically on pronunciation, teaching and learning. And actually, for a lot of teachers that I speak to, it can be quite overwhelming because they don't necessarily know where to start. Pronunciation isn't always very well integrated into course books, for example. So it can be a bit tricky for teachers to know how to train themselves and feel confident teaching this stuff, right? So yes, let me know. I can see there's been a lot of responders already to the poll, which is great. Clearly, most people feel mostly confident, which is good. But it's interesting to see how many people feel very, very confident. That's really, really good. I'd love to hear more about why as well. As in, any particularly good training, particularly good books or tools. And a significant number of responders as well, a number of you saying that you feel not very confident. Well, I hope that some of the things we're going to talk about today will help give you a bit of guidance and a bit more confidence or access to things that you can look at that can give you more confidence. But I'm not surprised to see nearly 20% of responders saying they don't feel confident. Oh, someone's put something, the myth of the RP speaker still permeates the industry. Yes, and we're going to talk about that a lot more through the course of this presentation, I think. Great. The comments are coming through really fast. I'm looking forward to catching up with some of these in a bit more detail after the session. I'd love to take a look at exactly what people are saying here. But okay, so we can see people feel mostly confident, which is good. I'm pleased to see that. Okay. In fact, what research often shows is that teachers don't feel very confident about pronunciation training, and there's clearly, I think, more support needed. And the perception sometimes can be that it's harder for non-native speaking teachers of English to teach pronunciation, but actually, in my experience from talking to people, it can be quite daunting for all teachers, regardless of whether you're a native or non-native speaking teacher. It doesn't have to be, but I think the lack of training means that people can feel a bit uncomfortable about it. And in some ways, important ways, actually, non-native speaking teachers can have a real advantage, particularly, of course, if they've got the same L1 as their learners, because they know exactly which sounds are going to be difficult for those learners when they're trying to master the sound system in English. They know exactly where to go to in terms of focusing on those sounds which are most relevant to that learner group because of the the sort of overlap sometimes, but also the mismatch perhaps between the sounds in their L1 and the sounds in English. Okay, great. So yeah, I think non-native speaking teachers have a lot to bring to the table when it comes to pronunciation training, and that's great. Okay. All right. Yes, increasing pronunciation integration in the classroom. So what I think is really interesting is that when you integrate pronunciation training into the English learning process, when you mix it in with other skills work, the pronunciation work can really, you can see how it helps the students get more value out of the English that they're learning, and in some cases the English they've learned before as well. And this was a bit of a revelation to me, because when I started teaching, I discovered that I had a natural interest in pronunciation. So I started to bring it into classwork. And not only did the students really appreciate it and respond to it, but it was a bit like it breathed new life into some of the English that they'd already learned, because they were suddenly finding that they understood better the pronunciation element, and then they were more confident about using that language and understanding it when they were hearing it as well. So there are some good tips actually in the position paper about integrating pronunciation into lessons. But one really simple way to do it is, of course, when you're teaching new vocabulary. I think it's a really good idea with some of, not all of the new vocabulary you teach, but with some of the new vocabulary, just check that the students know some of those basic pronunciation elements. Do they know how many syllables are in a word? Do they know where the stress is in that word? And, you know, maybe it has something like a tricky consonant cluster that you want to kind of isolate and practice. Maybe drill down right down to that consonant cluster and then build the word back up, or the phrase that sits around it back up. An ED ending, ED endings, students often struggle with understanding and feeling confident about how to pronounce those. So that might be a vocabulary or even a grammar point, excuse me, which you can use to help just draw out some of those pronunciation kind of training points. And learning pronunciation will help with vocabulary acquisition. So it's not a standalone skills training piece. It permeates and kind of integrates into a lot of the language work you're doing anyway. And I think I can just see another comment here, somebody saying, I'm not a native speaker and I'm not confident teaching pronunciation. I can sympathize with that. But I think, I hope that today, we're going to give you a few techniques that will help you feel more confident and point you in the direction of a few tools, and also help you appreciate why perhaps being a non-native speaking teacher can actually give you a significant advantage in terms of what you can do to help your students and focus on the right bits of pronunciation teaching, or the bits that are going to be the most effective for your students if you do share the same L1. Right, okay, I'll try not to get distracted by the comments, although it's so great to see them coming in. Yes, okay. Try not to get distracted by the person who's saying prejudice about accents. Let's talk about that more as well. All right. So integrating pronunciation into the classroom doesn't have to be time-consuming or complex. It doesn't always come up in course books, which is a bit of an issue, although I have to say in English File, for example, if anybody's used the English File course book, it has very good integration of pronunciation training. I sometimes use a really quick system in my own head to figure out which bits of vocabulary I might want to focus on for pronunciation. So I have a little acronym that I've made up, and it's, is it tough? T stands for, is the word tricky? U stands for, is it useful? And F stands for, is it frequent? Okay, so you don't, with pronunciation teaching, like you wouldn't teach a whole dictionary when you're teaching somebody vocabulary. With pronunciation training, you don't have to teach, you don't want to teach every sound or every pronunciation of every word. Try and figure out, is it tricky? Is it useful? Is it frequent? If it's 2 out of 3 of those, then it might be one that's worth putting on a special list to say, right, we're going to focus on the pronunciation of this and integrate it into your teaching, the things that you're teaching anyway, right? Okay. intelligibility over accent. So yes, I do think that actually teachers have a role to play, not only in highlighting the importance of pronunciation, but also in guiding students' perceptions of what good pronunciation means. And it's not about having a native speaker accent. It's about making sure good pronunciation is being intelligible, so that you can use English with a level of confidence when you're speaking and clarity, and that you can listen to and understand a whole range of English accents. That's what we mean by intelligibility, and that's where the focus should be. And there is, as we know, someone's already mentioned it in the comments, still a perceived value in speaking like a native, as I put that in inverted commas, but it is becoming less embedded. And also it's becoming less relevant, this point of view. So there's a reference in the position paper actually to a survey of school students in Finland. And what they found was that these Finnish students don't have aspirations to native-like pronunciation. Well, that's great. In fact, if you think about the role models that we have now for English as an international language, actors, musicians, sports people, and quite often they, as is totally natural, they retain elements of their L1 accent, but they're using English really confidently, very competently. They are role models for, expert users of English as an international language. And these are the types of language models that I think it's important to show our students and discuss and analyze with them. And of course, non-native speakers, you guys fall into that category too. Non-native speaking English teachers are expert users of English as an international language. And when we talk about what people perceive to be good pronunciation, sorry, I keep doing this, I think as teachers, we need to guide our students and make them realize that the important thing is intelligibility and using this language as a communications tool, right? Using it effectively. Yes, because ultimately pronunciation is vital for study and for career success. It's not enough to be able to, complete a beautifully grammatical sort of construction sentence, but people need to be able to use English for speaking and listening, for communicating, and so pronunciation is absolutely vital. When I'm working with, I've worked with a lot of business English students, and I often find that pronunciation is kind of a missing link. So, for example, I remember working with an international aerospace engineer, and he was talking to me about how he designed landing gear, and I couldn't really understand what he was trying to say. And eventually I realized landing gear, he was trying to say landing gear. He sort of was showing me the wheels coming down at the bottom of an aeroplane. Oh, okay, landing gear. But the good thing is that as soon as I was able to show him how to make that different sound, he immediately made the change, was completely intelligible and much more confident talking about this crucial part of what he does in his job. Okay. And then I had an international, business manager who'd written something, actually. It wasn't even in speaking, but in writing, he'd written to me telling me or something about that something was important in a bossiness contest. A bossiness contest. I love that idea that it's like, who can be the most bossy? This is a contest to see who's the most bossy. But what he actually meant was not in a bossiness contest. I thought about his pronunciation and I was like, okay, he's trying to write in a business context. Quite different. And what had happened in both these cases, the lending, landing, and business bossiness, contest, context, was that the learners were using more or less the right words and the right grammar, but the incorrect pronunciation had seriously impeded the intelligibility. We won't even talk about the mispronunciations I made when I moved to Portugal, and people couldn't understand what I was saying to start with. So I totally sympathize with the bossiness contest. But it was amazing to me to see written down this impact of pronunciation, and that once I explained to him how those words actually sounded in English, he was able to make that change pretty quickly, which was good. Okay. Right, so we know, we've talked quite a lot already, that we know we're teaching for international intelligibility, not for accent. So if we know that that's the objective, which aspects should we teach? This table, I'm afraid, is very small on the slide, but the reason I've put it on there is because I want you to have a visual reference for this table, which goes through the priorities, the priority pronunciation features for intelligibility. It's taken directly from the position paper. So hopefully when you have a look at the position paper later, you'll recognize this table and go, yeah, that's the one we were talking about, hearing about in this presentation. Okay, so this table basically highlights the 6 priority pronunciation features which were originally proposed by Jennifer Jenkins in her Lingua Franca core, which you may have heard of. And broadly speaking, there is still agreement that these are the features that are the first place that teachers should look at when they want to make sure that they're teaching pronunciation for intelligibility. This is how we equip our students to be understood and confident using English in a global context. And to run through them quickly, we're going to do more detail in a little moment. We've got consonant sounds, aspiration at the beginning of a word, consonant clusters, vowel length, sentence stress, and number 6, my favorite actually, is word stress. So over the next few slides, I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail, but I would definitely recommend taking a look at the paper later after we finished the sessions today when you have some time. Okay. Oh, yes, it's the waving polar bear. I'll explain a bit more about him later. So yeah, let's take a look at the first of these priority features. And what we're talking about here is, again, is how can we make sure that we're training our students as effectively as possible so that they can use English in an intelligible way internationally, right? So consonant sounds seems like a fairly basic place to start, but they are really important. Most consonant sounds are really important. So if your students are trying to say the word flight, like the aeroplane, there's another aeroplane, an aeroplane taking off, flight, but they mispronounce the l sound and they're saying fright, then that is going to be a problem for intelligibility. And that's the kind of issue that you would definitely want to work on with them. But not all consonant sounds are as impactful. So for example, the word this, and I know that the TH sounds can be really tricky for learners. The word this can be pronounced dis, that's fine. And actually month is something which is increasingly common in UK accents with the TH replaced with a f sound at the end of the word. It's not going to impede intelligibility. And so it'll be less of a focus. So let's just think about consonant sounds in a bit more, broadly beyond the ones that we've just got in these 2 examples here. Well, actually, no, let's take a look at the example in my title. He bought 1,000 chairs. Yeah, this is a tricky one, isn't it? So he bought 1,000 chairs. Well, I don't know. Maybe this person's going to have a really big party, invite all his friends, all the friends of his friends. He's going to, fill the room with 1,000 people and they all need a chair. Or maybe he's bought 1,000 shares. This is a really good example, I think. In the context, that would make it would make a lot more sense anyway, I think. Yes, is it shares? Good. Oh, I'm glad you get it. That's great. So yes, the point being that these consonant sounds can have a real impact on intelligibility. So you do need to focus on them. And I think a good place to start is by showing your learners what they can do. So imagine, take a chart. There's one in the back of English File, or just a sound chart that you can print off and look at all of the consonant sounds that do map on to your learners' L1s. And then try and isolate the ones that obviously that don't, that are a little bit trickier, because that's where you need to focus. Yeah, 20th is totally acceptable with an F sound. I think if that's easier, your students can do that. And I think there are probably other things that you might want to concentrate on or help, spend time on rather than trying to distinguish 20th from 20th. It's worth considering. Okay, sorry, I was responding to one of the comments there that just caught my eye. So yeah, look at which sounds your students can make. Isolate the ones that they can't. This is in terms of consonants, but it could be any sound really. Look at how many sounds there are, consonant sounds in English versus in their L1. There may be a different number of sounds. So make sure you're giving them that awareness, and in particular, giving them the confidence that there are a lot of sounds that they can already make. And then for the ones that are more difficult, we just talked about 20th. That is an acceptable variant. And maybe there's a sound in their own L1 which is close enough that could work as an allophone, an acceptable variant that's going to mean it's just a lot easier for them to substitute that sound and then move on and focus on other features of pronunciation. Okay, right, the waving bear. We're coming on to him now because the second point on this slide and the second point in our list of 6 is about initial aspiration. And this is also where, if you have it, you need your piece of tissue paper. So if you have a piece of tissue paper, we are going to talk about aspiration, and we're going to use this to show aspiration. And this is something you can do with your students as well. If the aspiration at the beginning of a word is too weak, then it can really change the sound and therefore change the meaning. Okay, so we've got 2 words here. We've got pear and bear. And we can see from the note, and we know this anyway, that P is aspirated. So when I say pear, pear, the tissue paper moves. But when I say bear, 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 it doesn't move. And I love this aspect of pronunciation teaching, which is that you can make it quite physical. You can make it quite physical, and you can show your students and help them feel the difference, because otherwise, orally, it's quite difficult to pick that up, right? So by showing them something physical, you've got a much better chance of helping them understand the difference, feel the difference. And I think, showing them the importance of the difference as well, because they may not really be aware of that the aspiration at the beginning of a word is even important. But if you ask for a bear for dessert, you're probably not going to get quite what you expected. I'm glad you like the demo, and I would love to know if anybody's trying this now. Tell me in the comments if you're saying pear, and watching your tissue paper flying around. I hope you are. Yeah, brilliant. And if you're not trying it now, please do try it later. It's quite fun, and definitely try it with students because it is good fun. Okay. So that's aspiration. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this slide looks a bit blank now, but don't worry because I have another prop. Explaining the priorities, consonant clusters, explaining the priorities. And I've deliberately, yes, somebody mentioned the candle trick. You can do it with a candle. I thought about demoing aspiration with a candle, but I decided this was a bit safer and also more transferable to the classroom. But if you want to do it with a candle, go for it. Okay, consonant clusters. So consonant clusters are something that students always struggle with, right? They always struggle with consonant clusters. And I would love to know in the comments if your students struggle with consonant clusters, and if so, which type of words. I'm sure we can get some great examples in a minute. So tell me which consonant clusters your students find the most tricky, probably all of them, to be honest. When it comes to consonant clusters, the research shows that adding an extra sound is kind of okay. That's not necessarily going to impact intelligibility. So sometimes I hear students saying things like station instead of station, like train station, and they'll say station. That's okay. That's still intelligible. I'm not saying you wouldn't want to correct it. You would consider correcting it, but there might be other things to work on first. Yeah, str is definitely a tricky one. Str is a tricky consonant cluster. Yeah, ST again, through and strategy. We've got an interesting little reel actually on Learning English with Oxford. I'll mention that again later because we did just a 1-minute reel video on the pronunciation of through and though, comparing those two. But yeah, consonant clusters. You can add an extra sound in and still be intelligible, but what you can't do is take sounds out. It becomes, and this is in particular at the beginning of a word or in the middle of a word. So the example that I wanted to show, and I'm hoping this won't come out back to front, is this film. Has anybody seen this before, or you know the music from this one? Ooh, you can see at the end, hopefully it hasn't come out back to front. At the end of this word, they've taken off the G, singing in the rain, and that's fine. That's totally intelligible. But what you can't do is take out a letter in the middle. You'd get sinning in the rain. I don't know what that is, but probably not one to discuss now. Or singing in the rain. I don't know. That's, yeah. You can't take the consonants out of the clusters, but you can add an extra consonant in if it makes it a little bit easier to pronounce. Yeah. And actually, there are some good examples in the position paper for how to teach consonant clusters. And I love that. So this one is quite complex. If you've got higher level students, if you've got higher level students and you're looking at the third conditional, there's an example in the position paper for consonant clusters specifically about the pronunciation of, if we hadn't followed them, we'd have got lost. We'd have got lost. That's a great little kind of squashed set of consonants which are worth practicing from a pronunciation viewpoint as well as a grammatical viewpoint, right? So you can probably find simpler examples. But again, it's about integrating pronunciation into your classroom. It doesn't need to be difficult or time consuming. If you notice that there's a phrase or a word that has a tricky consonant cluster, particularly one that's coming up again and again, try isolating it and practicing it. Also with grammar, if you kind of flip the grammar point and say, we're going to focus on the sound, the pronunciation, it helps to change the perspective, I think, of the student's brain. So they're not thinking, oh, grammar, grammar, grammar. They're like, okay, I'm thinking about sound. I'm thinking about my mouth movements. And it actually helps consolidate the grammar quite often, I find. So yeah, lots of advantages to integrating pronunciation into the classroom. Right, moving on. Vowel length. Right, so the image you can see here, I'll just mention now, actually you can see from the little icon, is taken from the Say It app, which is the one that I developed because I wanted to help my students understand the sounds of English better. And I wanted to make the sounds of English visual, and I wanted to make them more interactive for my students. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this image from Say It. And I should probably... Actually, let me talk about the long and short vowels first, then we'll talk about the content that's up on the screen. Okay, someone mentioned in the comments about making things physical and how useful that is. And I think for long and short vowels, this is a place where you can do that because it's, again, quite hard to hear the difference, although the students definitely need to understand the difference between long and short vowels. It's important for intelligibility. So the difference between fill and feel. Okay, you can use the students can feel literally the difference in terms of the way that their mouth sits. So when you move from fill, that central vowel, to feel, you can actually feel your mouth widening. If you put your finger and thumb here, start with fill, fill, feel, fill, feel. It's quite subtle, but you can feel the mouth widening. And in another example, a better example probably for feeling the difference, cat and car. So if for this one, your jaw is going to drop. So if you put your finger on your top lip and your thumb under your chin and say cat, car, cat, car, cat, car, you can really feel that one. And that's great because you can show you want your students to focus on vowel length, but you also want to give them a context which takes it beyond just the aural, just the listening. And so that feeling that physical process is really helpful. And then the second aspect of vowel length, which is, the second aspect of vowel length, which is important, and I think perhaps harder to demonstrate, but important to make sure that students have an awareness of, is how vowel length can change depending on the phonemic context, the sounds that sit around that vowel. So here we have this example. This was an example actually that was submitted as a question in the Learning English with Oxford channel. Peas and peace. Now, they didn't ask for peas spelt P-E-E-S, but we didn't have a plural form of the pea, the vegetable, in the Say It app. So I used this homophone to substitute. But the point here is that I think this is really interesting to show students. Both these words have the same vowel sound, the E sound. But as you can see on the waveform for the recordings of these words, the length of the vowel sound in peas is a lot longer than the red arrow, the length of the vowel sound in peace. And that's because, I think as probably a lot of us know, when the vowel sound is followed by z, the voiced consonant, peas, it makes that vowel sound longer. But I really do think this is a good example of how the visual helps you show your students and demonstrate to them these changes in sound, in vowel length. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, visually presented sounds are great to help students. They really are, because most people don't necessarily have the ability. It's a bit abstract sometimes, the sound. They can't necessarily hear the differences, but when you show them and you can see it, this is what's great about things like the International Phonetic Alphabet, of course, as well. But the way things are visualized in Say It, and there are other apps maybe that do similar things, but this is the one I like to use. You can show people and they can touch it as well in the app. So that's great. All right, let's move on. I think I'm running a little bit behind. I'm sorry. Point 5, international intelligibility. Remember, we're looking at these 6 priorities: nuclear or sentence stress. So what exactly are you saying? This one is pretty obvious, but it's so important, particularly if your learners have an L1 that where sentence stress doesn't follow this pattern of emphasizing the main idea, right? So it's not always the case, but in English it is. So you can train your students, show your students how to exaggerate or emphasize the key word in a phrase to make sure that they're getting their point across clearly. This is not just an exercise, in isolation. This is showing them what's important and how to make sure that they are intelligible and that they're able to make their points clearly. Okay, so we've got the same phrase with 3 different emphases here, haven't we? I've rented a flat, so making a statement, or maybe saying it's not a house, it's a flat. I've rented a flat, so I haven't bought it, but I've rented it. Or I've rented a flat, not my parents, not my partner, but me. I've rented a flat. And I think that's, it's pretty easy to explain that one, which is great, but it is very impactful in terms of international intelligibility. I'm glad you like the examples. Okay. Then we've got, this is another image from Say It. So you might recognize the colors and the waveform. This is how the main screen of the app looks. So word by word broken down with the number of syllables, the stress, then the model waveform at the top, which is the one taken from OUP's recording bank. And then underneath, the second waveform is the user waveform. So in that case, it was me. You record yourself, and then you can compare, you can drag your finger over the sound waves to break down, hear those how the sounds are blended together. And this is my favorite part actually about teaching pronunciation, which is stress. And I definitely think stress to impress. You can teach your students that because it's so important and it makes such a difference. So I was recently on a call with a developer, an app developer, and we were talking about a feature that we want to develop in Say It. And we were talking about these instances, and he kept saying event instead of event, event, because he was stressing the first syllable, and it was very difficult, even though I knew what he was saying in the context, but it was really distracting, and it was impeding the flow of the conversation, put it that way. And so I thought, at first I thought, I'm not going to correct him. That's not what this is. It's not an English lesson. But actually, eventually I thought, no, I'm just going to sort of make the point to him that he should be probably stressing the second syllable there. It's going to sound a lot better, a lot easier for me to understand. And of course, it was another one of these situations where it was actually a really quick fix, although he'd been saying event for a long, long time. So it was really embedded. So the first couple of times that he tried to make the change, it came out a little bit strange, and then he sort of paused but did it correctly, and eventually, you know, through the course of the conversation, when I say eventually, it was within the space of a couple of minutes, he was saying event, event, event. And it was important because this particular word in that context and with his job is a really high frequency word with a massive functional load. So it was an important change. And I think what's quite interesting in terms of international intelligibility as well is that if this person had said event or ovent, I would have found it easier to follow that. But because, I'm sorry, I should say, let me try that again. If he'd said event or event, that's what I meant to say, stressing that second syllable, I would have found it easy enough to follow, and I wouldn't have felt any need to even point out to him that maybe that first vowel sound wasn't quite right. But because he was stressing the first syllable, it was really difficult for me to follow. Making that change had a massive impact in terms of improving his international intelligibility. Okay, just to finish up on this section then, so we talked about pronunciation training. And we primarily think about that as speaking and listening skills, but actually neuro-linguistic evidence shows that this also has an important kind of impact on reading fluency and on vocabulary acquisition we mentioned before. So pronunciation is not just about speaking and listening, of course it is primarily, but reading fluency and vocabulary acquisition, and even as we saw in the example with the bossiness contest, you know, these pronunciation kind of inaccuracies can feed into writing as well. We've probably all seen some examples of that. Definitely interferes with fluency. I feel like sometimes you feel like by teaching pronunciation, it's like being a bit of a personal trainer and making it easier for people to use the English they have, and certainly to get more value out of the English they have. Okay, so we're going to move on to a section now about using technology for pronunciation learning, and I can see that I'm going to have to speed up a bit.
Jenny, yeah, I just wanted to say you've got about 8 minutes left.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. I'm sorry, Stacey. Okay.
Right.
So I do have a question for you guys. I would love to know if you're using any apps or technology for pronunciation training. If you are, let me know in the comments, because I think what's important for me to say here really quickly is that technology is something that can really help, particularly with pronunciation training. Okay, someone's using ELTOC, great. Voice recognition, yeah. Okay, so it can be particularly helpful for learning, but I think that teachers need to guide students. They need to guide students on what they're using, how they're using it, make sure it's being used effectively. And if you can do that, then it offers a lot of benefits. A consistent language model, a range of accents, learner autonomy, individualized practice. I love this one, portability, the extended classroom. You know, being able to practice out of the classroom with something like pronunciation is particularly helpful because people can do it in a quiet space and feel more confident, and then come back into the classroom and speak with more confidence, interact better. And of course, apps never get tired, unlike teachers who do get tired after after a while. And the objective for us with the Say It app was to, as I said, to make it visual and make it interactive. And we see this kind of hyper engagement, which is really interesting to me. The human computer interaction element here, I think, can be engaged to really help learners take big steps forward with pronunciation and with their confidence in speaking English. When I watch students using Say It, they get this kind of hyper focus, and they're in this loop where they might record themselves 5 or 6 times in the space of a couple of minutes, do the student-led analysis, and then come out with a significantly enhanced pronunciation. So that's the kind of what we want out of technology. But if your students are using apps that don't offer that, or that maybe are a bit more of a distraction, then maybe you want to steer them away from those and find things that can be really effective. I'm just going to talk very briefly about some research that we did with Say It at the University of the West of England. So we had international students, about 100 of them, using the Say It app and giving us some feedback. But we started by asking them about whether they felt confident using English and why it was important to them to improve their English speaking and listening. And unsurprisingly, we discovered that they want more English speaking and listening training, and the impact of having not had it or not having that confidence is quite significant. So one person responded and said, my English is good on a technical level, but I'm experiencing a lot of difficulty with conveying myself, my personality in English. People are not forgiving to accents in social situations, it seems, and that can feel alienating, and I've got low confidence. I mean, this is the sort of thing that makes me think, people want and need more speaking and listening pronunciation training. On the next slide, we've got a couple more comments, similar comments, and the chart, which is a little bit small to see, but this is people responding to the features of the app that they found most helpful. They liked the features of the app overall, which is great, but what they really liked was the slow play, so being able to control the sound at the speed they wanted to, and the stress syllable markers. So they were clearly understanding that being able to see, hear, and interact with where those stressed syllables are was a bit of a revelation to them, really important and really useful. And I just would like to say that if there are any researchers out there watching who are interested in, so the next step for us will be to take this to a bigger cohort, and really see whether the feedback that we got, which is that using Say It over a longer period of time would improve people's confidence, their ability to, as they felt, to kind of engage with their studies, but also to enjoy living in the UK. We'd love to kind of test out those theories. That's what people imagined would happen if they used Say It for longer, and we want to test that out. So any researchers who are interested in this area, who might like to get in touch with me, please feel free to do so. Okay, activities, great. So we've got a couple of different activities just to finish up. Same word, multiple accents. You can, it's pretty much as it says, really, listening to the same word across different accents and getting your students to kind of listen and compare. So one way you can do this really quickly and easily to get started is go to the Oxford Learners Dictionary's website, take a look at a word. I've picked the word surprise, but there are loads of examples. And you can see, even in the phonetic script, that in the American English pronunciation, the sound at the end of that first syllable is pronounced, whereas in the British English, it's not. So the idea would be to get your students to listen, pick out some of those differences, maybe see whether they feel that their own pronunciation is closer to one or the other. And then you can take it a step further and go to a site like Youglish. Youglish is the one I would recommend, actually, and listen to the same word across a whole range of different accents. Australian, New Zealand, UK, Irish, Canadian, Scottish. It's got a whole range, which is quite fun. So you can hear all of those different English accents, and maybe challenge your students to find an international English user, speaker of English as an international language with good pronunciation, and hear how that person delivers these particular words. Second activity is a pronunciation app mini hack. So I would love to know if anybody wants to tell me in the comments, if you were going to build a pronunciation app and put one on the market, what would you call it? And this is the type of question you can use to get your students thinking about this as well. It's a really nice little project where probably you put the students in groups and you ask them to come up with a concept for a pronunciation app. They can design the product, so the name, the icon, maybe they can draw a wireframe or do a description that shows how this app is going to work and teach people, write a promotional text, think about how much it would cost. And there's a short reference at the bottom there to Learning English with Oxford, because the little thumbnail shows one example of a short video that we put together for pronunciation of the word cough. This is aimed at learners rather than specifically at teachers, but we do have a lot of teachers tuning into our live streams, actually, which is always great. Maybe check that out and see whether that's something that could help your learners too. Right. So today I'm not going to have time to answer any questions. That's a shame. We talked about effective pronunciation teaching, which is really important for developing this successful international communication that we want our learners to be able to have. We talked about which key sounds and aspects of English as an international language are the first ones that we probably want to focus on, the priority focuses in pronunciation training. And we talked about embracing learning technology. A technology is never going to replace a teacher, but it is something that is, as teachers, if we can help guide and shape and help our learners get the best out of technology, then it's definitely something that can enhance what we offer as educators. And I've said any questions, but I think, Stacey, have I got time to answer some questions?
I think you have time to answer one.
Answer one. No, I did pick up a few as I went through. The comments looked so interesting, and I'm actually really looking forward to going back as well and looking at some of these questions and comments in more detail. But
did you want me to pick out a question for you, maybe?
Yeah, because I can't actually.
Quite a few.
I'm trying to see. Yeah, please do, Stacey, because I can't really see.
Okay. Well, there's one here. Are there any effective ways to teach pronunciation to a large group of students with 60 or 70 students in a class?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, that's such a challenge, isn't it? Because even if you've got 5 students in a class, I think you're going to have some people who are more confident or less confident. I would say that so when I'm when I'm demonstrating and trying to teach a little bit on live streams where we have a totally, a largish number of people, but unknown, and I can't even see them, I'm using I've adapted, I suppose, activities that allow me to get people to tell me in the comments if things are working or not, or if they're feeling or hearing the difference in sounds. You would have to adapt what you're teaching to mean that those individuals could go away and either try it themselves, like maybe the car cat thing, or point them in the direction of resources, digital resources and technology that, again, they can work within their own time. This is one of the reasons that we developed Say It. It's because teaching pronunciation, even with a small group of students in the classroom, it's obviously you can do it, and there's lots of useful things you can do, but actually getting people to practice and really absorb some of the aspects of the sounds. It's great if you can show them resources that they can use individually as well. I'm not sure. That is such a challenge. I can't imagine trying to teach to 70 people. But yes, it's a good question.
There is one more. Probably have one more question. This goes back to that issue of intelligibility versus kind of correctness.
Yeah.
In many English-speaking cultures, this is from Susan, in many English-speaking cultures, not pronouncing the th, it gives the impression of a lack of intelligence. Is it important for students, professional lives, to emphasize these sounds, even if they can be understood without them? So how important is that?
You have to make the decision for your students in the context, because I completely agree with, and obviously nobody would deny that is the case. I think the point that's important to make is that so if you're going into a professional context and you're working particularly with native English speakers, yes, that sound has a lot more value and definitely isn't one that you would want to ignore or pass by. If you're maybe at more of the kind of the foundation stages of pronunciation teaching, and that sound is really hard for your students, you might want to allow them to substitute a sound initially, or the sound initially, and focus on other things, but then come back to it as they progress. So you have to think about the specific context. I think the important thing is don't try to teach everything at once, and make sure that you're clear, you're guiding your students through the foundation priority sounds to start with.
Yeah, and I think we've got one more minute. So how do you correct pronunciation without interfering with fluency?
Yes. Well, again, you have to kind of be able to make a decision, don't you, in that moment. So when I was speaking with this developer who was saying event, and it was really, you know, I could understand him, and I certainly didn't want to, I wasn't even teaching him. We were having I was his client. We were having a business conversation. So I didn't want to interrupt him, and his fluency was great. His overall use of English was great. But I just found a moment at the end, because this is such a high frequency word in that context. I thought, I'm just gonna tell him he just needs to shift that stress. So you have to make a judgment, maybe have a little, so I sometimes have a notebook in class and write down, you know, some of the words that, again, are they tricky? Are they useful? Are they sort of high frequency? And if they are, they might be worth putting on a list and coming back to later. It depends. If your class or that part of the section of class you're teaching is about focusing on a particular sound, then it's probably okay to do a bit more of the kind of interrupting, if you like. But generally speaking, it's about getting a balance and coming back to things later. So I really enjoyed what you said. It was really fluent, and I really enjoyed listening to X, Y, and Z. Let's just go back and look at these sounds.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. I think we're going to wrap up there. And thank you. That was really, really inspiring.
Oh, it was a lot of content. So I hope that, I'm sorry I didn't have more time to answer questions, but thank you, Stacey, for picking some of those out at the end. And I really enjoyed seeing the interaction as we were going through. I'm thinking hopefully lots of people are going to have a bit of tissue paper in class on Monday.
I have my tissue.
Did it work? Did you do pair and bear?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well done. Oh, that's great. It's fun, isn't it? I'm glad that you were able to try that too, Stacey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed being part of ELTOC, and enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody.